Welcome to the Insight Research Podcast, where we explore the journeys and motivations of clinical academics, researchers, and healthcare professionals shaping the future of healthcare and science. In today's episode, we're delving into the exciting world of clinical research. What does it mean to be a clinical academic or a clinical researcher? How do they bridge the gap between research and practice? And what inspires them to take on this unique role? So, joining us today is...
Hi, I'm Sam Irving. I'm a respiratory physiologist and clinical academic.
Nice to meet you. And I'm Firdaus, student occupational therapist. So for our listeners who might be new to this, how would you define a clinical academic or a clinical researcher?
So for me, a clinical academic is someone who is a health or care professional from any background. We can be nurses, midwives, obviously our medic colleagues, or things like me. So I'm a healthcare scientist and clinical scientist by background, who's also engaged in research and who's actively working in both those worlds.
Right, yeah. And would you say finding the definition, when did you feel that it was defined for you? At what stage of your
that's
career?
A really good question. So I did my PhD while I was working, so I did it part-time, which obviously was a clinical academic split therefore, but I had no idea that's what the word was for it then. But not long after my PhD, I went to an OHR event, and it was specifically aimed at trying to get those of us from health and care professions into research. And that was the first time I'd heard it used. It was certainly the first time I'd heard it used for anyone that wasn't a doctor. Mm-hmm. And as soon as they explained it, I'm like, right, that's what I want to be. That thing. That's that. Yeah. Oh. And that's been the plan since then, really.
That sounds great. And in your day-to-day, what does a typical day look like for you as a clinical, is it academic?
Yep. So I think, obviously there are some days that you wouldn't be able to tell me apart from my clinical colleagues, because I work with children with respiratory illnesses, and for the most part, we're a tertiary centre, so an awful lot of my work is in the outpatients department. So on a day where I've got clinics, my job looks very similar to my entirely clinical colleagues. I'm running around an outpatients department trying to find children in the right place and persuade them to do various lung function tests that they don't really want to sit and do. But the difference with this is as well as combining that, it means I have time for my academic activities as well. So, for instance, a good split day could see me in clinic in the morning, as I said, racing around with children and trying to get them to do various lung function tests that we need to do to monitor them right. But it is a little bit difficult with the kids sometimes. Mm-hmm. And then the afternoon, I'm going back to my office, which is quite a busy shared office, and putting my headphones on and writing or reviewing a paper. Oh. Or answering emails to do with how I'm managing a research grant or how we're recruiting to a study. And I do think it's important to have that split. Yeah. And certainly for me, I like having the fact that my day can look like two different things depending where we are in the day.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned working with children, reviewing papers. How would you say your role contributes to improving patient care or advancing healthcare practice?
So for me, very much, I always say this with research that, all of us that are clinical really want to think that we're doing good clinical practice, we're doing the best we possibly can do, we're giving good evidence-based care to improve the lives of our patients. I mean, that's why we're all in healthcare, isn't it, surely? But the trouble is, your career, if all you ever do is clinical, your career is limited just by how many patients you can see over your career. Yeah. Because if you do research, there can be centres you've never visited with patients you will never meet, and they'll get better care because you did research and because you then got your research out there for other people to see. And so for me, really, we all want to give the best care we can for our patients. But I really do think it's so important that we also tell people about it. We get the evidence to back up what we're doing and get it out there, because that's how we help more patients than the ones we'll see.
Yeah. And also you mentioned NIHR event, and I've also been to one personally, and by the way, they're great. So could you share what first sparked your clinical interest and research?
So with me, I'd started a job at the Royal Brompton, which is a fantastic tertiary centre, and we see children with really quite complex conditions. And we were dealing with a particularly rare condition called primary ciliary dyskinesia, PCD, which is my little niche. And what these patients do is they have difficulty clearing mucus in their lungs, which leads to lots of infections. Okay. And we started doing some tests with some of the PCD patients, and we realised that the results we were getting were quite different to what we'd expect. We knew how this behaved in other conditions, but it wasn't behaving the same way. So I went to my boss and said, what do you think this is? And he said, I don't know, actually. And so we both went to our lead consultant, the professor, and went, well, what's this then? And he went, I don't know, actually. And it became clear that the only way to answer this question about what was going on with my patients and what was the best way to manage them was doing some research.
Okay.
So I started off doing a little bit. I got them all together and I did a little audit and I found all their results. And it became clear it was more complicated than we thought. And I was very lucky that lead consultant said he would supervise a PhD if we could sort it out, which we then did. So I went on and did my PhD. But honestly, it really was because something came out of my clinical practice.
Yeah.
And for me, that's so important. I know you can get sort of off-the-shelf PhDs, but for me, doing something that I was really passionate about clinically was really key, I think.
Yeah. And would you say, when you did your bachelor's, would you say research was something that you knew of prior?
I definitely knew of. So as a respiratory physiologist, you can now train as an undergraduate, but 20 years ago when I was training, you couldn't.
Oh, right.
So I did a science degree.
Okay.
But actually I had quite a bad research experience.
Really?
I did a dissertation, so it was a sort of traditional degree, so I did a dissertation, but the person that was supposed to be supervising it was running a project in Malaysia, and something went terribly wrong with the project and he had to fly to Malaysia about 6 weeks in, and I never saw him again. And after my BSc, I really didn't want to do any more research. I just wanted to get a nice clinical job and do my work.
Fair enough.
And then I realised that I wanted to do more than that. But.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds great. Okay. And you also mentioned, was it a clinician or that helped you out?
Yes. Yeah.
So would you say that he was one of the facilitators in your research career?
Oh, definitely. I'm very lucky I had him. So he's a medical doctor.
Okay.
But he's always been really, really encouraging of trying to get other health and care professionals into research. He always says that he hopes everyone that works in his department leaves better qualified than when they came. And he's really supportive in general. And I was very lucky that he felt very strongly about it and was sort of like, he actively wanted health professions working for him to have a chance to do research.
Yeah.
So I was very lucky.
And it's really great having support when you're going into
hugely.
research as well.
And also, he was my supervisor, but I really couldn't have done it without a supportive department as well. Yeah. We're a small specialist multidisciplinary team of sort of nurses, as physiologists, as physios, and everyone on the team was so supportive of me doing it, and I'm so lucky because it just wouldn't have been sustainable without their support.
And as a researcher, I can imagine there's so many challenges that you face. You even mentioned the Malaysian researcher that had to go back 6 weeks in. Is there anything that you've faced in your career that you would describe as a challenge?
I certainly think that perhaps one of the challenges we've come across is that it's all very well doing research when you've managed to get a fellowship grant or an award or something, but the periods between them can be pretty bleak. I say I'm lucky, I work in a very supportive department and everyone was happy to sort of facilitate me still carving out a little bit of time for research for myself.
Yeah.
But it's certainly, until very recently, it wasn't actually a formal part of my job role. And I think that's the case. We all acknowledge research is one of the 4 pillars of practice. But it's still very rare to see it on anyone's job description or job plan these days. And so when you've not got outside funding, it can be really quite difficult and a bit disheartening. And I think like a lot of people, you end up doing a lot of the stuff like the writing up and things on your own time. And it's very easy to get a bit tired and burnt out if you're not careful.
Yeah. And you said you're at Royal Brompton Hospital. So how familiar are you with other clinical researchers or clinical academics? Do you work with them?
Yeah, so I'm really lucky, as I said, in our sort of networks we've had is working at a centre that always valued research. There were other people who were also doing their research, be they physios, dietitians, all that kind of thing. So I was very lucky there were other people in our wider networks. But also now I'm doing my academic work at King's College and working with their clinical academic training office. And it's given me a lot more opportunity to get out and meet other people and talk about their research. And honestly, I would say that's hugely important. And it's not just that, it's sort of my professional networks as well. The body that regulates physiologists has been enormously helpful. And finding other like-minded people is so important just for keeping your sanity when you're doing research. So yeah, I think whenever you do get the opportunity, do go and talk to someone else about their research. If nothing else, those of us who do our research honestly really like it and we're a bit boring and we would love to tell other people about it. So I really do love getting to hear other people's research and their struggles and their experiences of their career. So yeah, both my hospital and the wider networks I'm involved in have been brilliant.
Yeah, and that just shows the importance of networking and connections.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, networking, I can remember the first time I saw networking time on an agenda, and I was a bit like, I don't know, I want to network. Yeah. But actually it means spending an awful lot of time with other people talking about their research. And also you get good ideas of people. It's like, I'm thinking about applying to that scheme. Oh, I applied to that one. Actually, it says you can do this, but don't do it that way. Do it this way. And it's just really helpful.
Yeah. And for those considering a career in clinical research, as myself, what steps should they take? Is there any specific skills or qualifications that we should have?
I actually think probably more than specific qualifications. I think it's probably skills and, if you like, almost qualities. I mean, there's a high level of resilience.
Yeah.
Because everyone that I know in research has been turned down at some point for something they really wanted.
Yeah.
And it's awful and you feel like absolute hell for a couple of weeks, but it just happens. And I think you need to sort of be able to pick yourself up and keep going when stuff like that happens is really important. I mean, the professor I mentioned who supervised my PhD, he used to have a big box of things he'd been rejected for, even though he was this eminent and wonderful clinician and researcher. And whenever you're sad, you could go and look at the box of things they turned him down for and feel better and that it wasn't just you. But I think resilience is enormously important. Again, networking, talking to other people.
Exactly.
And all of us sort of researchers want other people to be involved and infused in research. So talk to people, email people. And also the other thing I would say is, if you possibly can, something that as a junior researcher really excited me and really helped sort of solidify this is where I want to be, see if you can manage to get along to a conference or something like that in your area of specialty. A lot of them will have special rates for students, and you might find that universities or departments you're working in will be able to pay fees as well. And sometimes also at the last minute, if you sometimes email the organisers and ask if there's any free student places going, sometimes there is.
Okay.
And I really do think, certainly for me, the first big conference I went for was just mind-blowing. I just wandered around, there were all these people who were excited about the same things that I was excited about, and it was really lovely. So I would say that if you possibly can, if you've got a final year project, talk to your supervisor about whether it will make a nice little abstract to put in for somewhere, because then they'll almost definitely pay for you to go. And just, if you can, try and get yourself along to one of those. Doesn't have to be a big fancy American one and all that kind of stuff. It can be one just somewhere in the UK for your professional group. It's really, I found it really exciting as junior researcher.
Oh, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. And for those who are already in clinical practice, what advice would you give to them trying to get into research?
Yeah, it's difficult when you're in clinical practice, particularly working full-time, and particularly, we all know at the moment working in the NHS is hard. We're still dealing with the backlog of COVID. We've nearly all got waiting lists. It is difficult. I would say look out for the people in your clinical areas and wider clinical departments that are doing research and try and find them. In an ideal world, there'll be clinical academics from the same professional group as you, but it doesn't matter if it's medical doctors. It doesn't matter if it's a nurse and you're a dietitian. Okay. Go and talk to them and just say, I'm interested in research. What do you think we can do? Because the odds are on they've got a tiny little audit or a little project or even a little QI thing you could do that will just let you sort of grow some of those research skills, develop some of your interest, and get noticed by people that this is what you want to do.
Yeah. And also, in your day-to-day life, how do you manage your work-life balance? Do you find you're working long hours and you're working overtime? How do you manage that?
It's tricky, because I think certainly when I first started doing it, it was just do everything in every spare hour I can possibly find. But in the long run, it's not good for your mental or physical health. So I think definitely for me, time management was a bit of a learned skill. It wasn't something that came naturally. I found it quite useful to work out when I actually had the spare energy to do things. Because, for instance, I have a colleague that swears by getting up at 5 o'clock before her children are up and getting a good hour in on her papers before the children get up. I am no use to anyone at 5 a.m. I will not write anything anyone wants to read. For me, it's more the other end of the day. I'm definitely a bit of a night owl. So, as I said, I have this big, busy shared office, but people go home about 5:30, and I'm normally still, pretty awake and working quite well for another hour or two. Yeah. So I try and carve out a bit of time at the end of my clinical day, put some music on and just use that time to catch up on my reading, to do a bit of writing. So I think it's about learning your own study skills again and your sort of your learning style. I think maybe you guys are still an undergraduate, you're learning a little bit of that. Those of us that went to clinical practice for 10 years, it can take a little while for all that to come back, but it's learning what works for you, I think.
Definitely. And before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share with like our audience about your experiences, like any interesting research projects you've done that you'd like to share?
There's a couple of things I could talk about. So firstly, I would say, and I should have said this in response to your question about good ways of getting into research. When I first started doing research, I also started doing some bits on other people's research studies.
Okay.
So effectively research delivery roles. I personally think sometimes these are great. They really help you get immersed in the research world. It make contact with people who might be prepared to supervise or mentor you. So I would absolutely say if you're a clinician and you're trying to think, how do I get into the world of research, don't discount research delivery just because you want to be a clinical academic. I'm definitely a clinical academic and I loved the bits of research delivery that I did. I was very lucky when I was doing, I just started my PhD, I got the opportunity to help out on a study that Professor Jane Davis was doing at Imperial College. Okay. Which was to do with gene therapy for cystic fibrosis, which was obviously, and then modulator therapy for cystic fibrosis, which became this enormous success story. But being there, working in that group in those first few months where we started working out this was going to be a huge success, was really exciting and really helped keep me motivated. So I would say don't look down on doing a bit of research delivery, because I really do think it gets you in touch with the right people. And the other thing I would say, particularly if we do have other sort of student listeners and that kind of thing, is please do talk to those of us who've done it before. Most of us would, I mean, I'm sure there is the odd person that isn't sure about it, but most of us would love to tell you about our experiences. We'd love to put you in touch with people that can supervise you, and we'd really love to help you out. So be brave and come and talk to us. We're not scary. Almost everyone that does research loves talking about their research. You know, if someone gave a guest lecture and it really moved you, email them and say so. You know, it's a really good way of keeping in touch with people, and we'd love to help other people come up as well.
Thank you so much. That was so great. Like all of that information. As students, like we really appreciate the advice as well. So thank you.
That's all right. Thank you very much for having me.
No worries. So now just to wrap up, I do want to mention that we've got a future episode discussing research nurses and practitioners and understanding their roles inside of delivery research team. And I want to thank you all so much for listening to the Insight South London Research Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more inspiring stories from healthcare and research professionals. Thank you.